Lent is a time of devotion, a season of sacrifice and spiritual cleansing. For 40 days, believers fast, reflect, and seek to grow closer to God. But what if I told you that the sacred period also has a dark side? Old traditions whisper of something else happening during these 40 days, something beyond fasting and prayer, a thinning of the veil between this world and the next. There are stories of people who ignored the warnings, who broke the ancient rules without realizing that those traditions were not just about faith, but about protection. Because during Lent, something unseen watches, and sometimes it reaches out. Story 1, the Midnight Fast. Mariana had always followed the Lenten traditions strictly. Every year, she fasted, avoided meat on Fridays, and spent time in prayer. But that year, something was different. It started with the dreams. Every night, she found herself walking down a long, endless hallway. The walls stretched impossibly high, their surfaces smooth and black, absorbing all light. A cold, suffocating silence filled the air, and behind her, a presence. She could never see it, never hear it, but she felt it, watching, waiting. Every time she woke up, it was the same. 3 a.m. Her room was always ice cold, her body drenched in sweat. At first, she thought it was just her mind playing tricks on her. Maybe stress, maybe just bad dreams. But then, the hunger came. It started as a dull ache in her stomach, just before bed. Then it became a deep, gnawing pain, an insatiable craving that grew stronger every night. By the second week of Lent, she could barely sleep. No matter how much she ate during the day, she always woke up starving. And on the night it happened, she couldn't fight it anymore. She crept out of bed, her stomach twisting painfully as she made her way to the kitchen. The house was silent. Still, the kind of silence that made her ears ring. As she opened the fridge, a shiver ran down her spine. It felt like someone was behind her. She turned. Nothing. With shaking hands, she grabbed a piece of bread, convincing herself that one small bite wouldn't matter. But the moment she put it in her mouth, the kitchen lights flickered. A wave of cold air rushed over her, raising goosebumps along her arms. Then, a sound, a slow, deliberate clicking on the floor, like nails tapping against tile. Not footsteps, not breathing, something else. The sound came from the hallway, just out of sight. Click, click, click. Mariana froze, her body paralyzed by an instinctual fear. She forced herself to turn her head slightly, just enough to see the hallway reflected in the kitchen window. And that's when she saw it. A shape, tall, too tall, motionless. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, as if listening. Then it moved, not like a person, not like anything living. A slow, jerking shift closer. The clicking on the floor stopped, and in a voice that was not human, "You broke the fast." The whisper slithered through the air, soft and guttural, spoken from somewhere too deep in the shadows. The bread fell from Mariana's fingers. She didn't breathe, didn't blink. Then, the kitchen lights cut out completely. The darkness swallowed everything. Mariana stumbled backward, her pulse hammering so hard she thought it would burst. She ran, blindly, desperately, back to her room, slamming the door shut and locking it. She didn't move, didn't sleep, didn't dare to breathe too loudly. Outside her door, the floor creaked, and then, slowly, agonizingly, the handle turned, but it didn't open. Something was on the other side, waiting. By sunrise, it was gone. But Mariana never ate after midnight again, because she knew now the fast wasn't just about discipline. It was about protection. And whatever had come for her that night was still out there. Story 2, the ashes on the doorstep. Santiago was not a superstitious man. He went to church when he had to, observed Lent like everyone else in his small town, but never took it too seriously. The stories about spirits roaming freely during this time? Nonsense. The warnings about not disrespecting the season? Just old traditions meant to scare people into behaving. So when Ash Wednesday arrived and his grandmother told him to put a line of blessed ashes at his doorstep to keep things from entering, he only laughed. If something wants to come in, Abuela, a little dust won't stop it. She didn't laugh. Then may God protect you, Mijo, she muttered. That night, the wind howled through the trees outside his small house, rattling the windows. The air felt heavy, thick with something unseen. He locked the doors, shut the curtains, went to bed like any other night. Then at 3:12 a.m., a knock at the door. Slow, deliberate. Santiago shot up in bed, heart hammering. No one visited this late, not in this town. The knock came again. He crept toward the door, hesitating. He didn't turn on the lights, just peeked through the peephole. No one was there. The street outside was empty, bathed in the dim glow of the street lamp. Then, a whisper, "Let me in," right next to his ear. Santiago stumbled back, heart slamming against his ribs. The voice had been close, too close, but there was no one there. He reached for his phone, hand shaking. No signal. Then he heard it, not from the door, from the window. The sound of fingernails dragging slowly against the glass. His stomach turned ice cold. He didn't want to look. He knew he shouldn't look. But something inside him, something not his own, made him turn his head. And there it was, a shadow pressed against the window, taller than the frame. No eyes, no mouth, just a dark, featureless shape with hands that were too long, fingers tapping against the glass in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Then, without moving, without opening a mouth, it spoke. "Why didn't you mark your door?" The words slithered into his mind like cold fingers. Santiago bolted to his room, locked the door, and curled beneath the covers like a terrified child. The tapping continued. For hours. Just before sunrise, it stopped. When he finally found the courage to open his door, a pile of ashes sat on his doorstep. But they weren't the ones his grandmother had told him to place there. These were black and warm, like something had burned them there. Santiago never mocked his grandmother's warnings again. And every year since, when Ash Wednesday arrives, he makes sure to mark his door, because he knows now something waits during Lent, and it's always looking for the ones who don't follow the rules. Story 3, the church that should have been empty. Gabriel had never missed a Sunday Mass in his life. Growing up in a deeply religious family, he was taught to respect sacred places, especially during Lent. His grandmother used to say that the devil worked hardest during these 40 days, tempting, whispering, looking for cracks in people's faith. But Gabriel didn't believe in superstitions. He believed in God, in prayers, and the strength of the church. And then one night, he learned that not everything inside a church is holy. It was the 4th week of Lent. The church in his town remained open for night prayers, and Gabriel had volunteered to lock up after the last visitors left. By midnight, the building was empty, or at least it should have been. He moved through the aisles, checking each pew, making sure no one lingered. The dim glow of candles flickered against the stained glass windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the stone walls. The silence was heavy, almost too heavy. As he approached the altar, he felt it, a shift in the air, like something had just stepped inside. A soft creak echoed from the back of the church. Gabriel turned sharply. The doors were still shut. The pews were still empty. But then, a whisper, a voice, barely audible, coming from the confession booth. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." Gabriel's blood turned to ice. The booth was empty. He knew it was empty. He had checked it himself. The whisper came again. "I said, forgive me." Slowly, carefully, Gabriel stepped toward the booth. The wooden door was slightly ajar, revealing only darkness inside. His hand trembled as he reached out, and then the door slammed shut. The candles blew out. The church was plunged into suffocating darkness. And then, right next to his ear, "You're not the priest." Gabriel stumbled back. His breath caught in his throat. The whisper had come from inside the booth, but the door hadn't moved. Then, a deep, slow exhale, coming from the other side of the confessional screen. Something was in there, waiting. The wooden panel between them creaked as something pressed against it. Too large, too heavy to be human. The air filled with the scent of something rotten, like old, damp earth and decaying flowers. Gabriel bolted for the doors. As he ran, the whispers followed him, overlapping voices, some pleading, some laughing, some mocking. "Stay, stay, stay." He didn't stop. He didn't look back. When he finally burst outside, the night air burned his lungs. He turned, expecting to see nothing. The church was dark and silent again, as if nothing had happened. But when he returned the next morning with the priest, they found the confessional booth's wooden screen, shredded, deep claw marks carved through the wood, and inside on the floor, a single blackened crucifix. Gabriel never stayed in the church alone after that, because now he knew not every prayer spoken during Lent is meant for God. Story 4, the procession that never ended. Elena grew up hearing stories about the procession to Las Almas, the procession of lost souls. Her grandmother used to warn her, if you hear the sound of a procession at night during Lent, do not look, do not follow, and whatever you do, do not join. It was an old tale, something passed down in whispers, but no one really believed it, not until Elena saw it for herself. It was the last Friday of Lent. The village was quiet, the streets empty, the night thick with eerie stillness. She had stayed late at a friend's house, helping prepare for the upcoming Holy Week celebrations. By the time she left, the air was cold, the scent of burning candles and incense lingering from the church. Then, the faint sound of bells, distant, echoing through the empty streets. She stopped. A procession at this hour? That made no sense. Then came the chanting, low, rhythmic, voices murmuring prayers in a language she couldn't quite understand. Her heart began to race. She turned a corner, and there they were, a long procession of people, dressed in dark robes, walking slowly through the main street. Each one held a candle, the flames barely flickering despite the wind. At the front, a figure carried a massive wooden cross. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Something was wrong. The robes looked old, tattered, almost like funeral shrouds, and the faces beneath the hoods. There were none, just darkness, hollow voids where eyes and mouths should have been. Then one of them turned its head toward her. No eyes, no face, yet she felt it looking at her. A wave of cold ran through her body. The figure raised its hand, beckoning. She stepped back, her instinct screaming at her to run. Then she noticed something even worse. The ground beneath the procession. They weren't walking on the cobblestone street. They were walking above it. Their feet never touched the ground. She stumbled backward, her hands shaking. And that's when the last figure in the procession whispered, "Walk with us." Her vision blurred. The world around her tilted. For a second, she almost did it, almost stepped forward. Then a bell rang from the church. The procession flickered, like smoke dissolving in the wind. Gone. Elena collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. By the time she made it home, she was shaking so badly she could barely lock the door. She told her grandmother what happened the next morning. The old woman's face went pale. "You saw them," she whispered. Elena nodded. Her grandmother placed a small vial of holy water in her hands. "You must be careful, Mija, because once you see the procession to Las Almas," she swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper, "they will see you too." That was the last night Elena ever walked alone during Lent, because now she knew some processions never end, and some souls never rest.